Welcome to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield.
And I think just to jump back onto something that you said earlier, Guy, about it being your own people, you need to look at your own people. And if it's widely known within the industry that certain firms are regularly taking on questionable clients, perhaps your law firm has said, no, we've done the test, we don't want to take you on, but you know for a fact that they're going to go to a law firm down the street. Does that create a duty for you to then report that firm, or is it sufficient to just simply decline the work for yourself?
The strict answer is it's sufficient to decline the work for yourself, but you would rather hope that some of the more active elements of civil society would then be able to say, right, we can now see, if you like, the corner of the profession where this practice has assembled, and they will then turn their whole attention, the sort of public spotlight and corruption, Transparency International, both represented on our task force. And I think you will then find they have got a much narrower target range, and they will do a pretty effective job of actually dealing and exposing those firms' practices, which would in turn make it very hard for those firms to continue, I think, because they would find it very hard to recruit. Yeah, but again, absolutely. People may say, well, that's not much good. You know, there's no law involved. Well, look back over the last 30 years. So how many did you crack using the law? Actually, very few.
And dare I say, in a way, the law is putting a Band-Aid on a deeper issue, which is that accountability, the transparency, the ethical side of the profession and your duty to the public. Of course, the law is there to prevent that, and you're always going to get bad actors. But I think that, as you say, the law, it needs to come from that duty of care.
I think that, the law clearly, yes, it'd be a bit odd if I said anything different, but you have to have the law. But what really the nub of all of this is the solicitor's profession gets these added privileges because it's actually meant to do more than just say we've done nothing illegal. And you will have seen people after the Russian invasion say, and they were correct, they'd done nothing illegal, because they've actually got a firm, unless a client is sanctioned or you're prohibited by law for acting for them. There aren't that many who fall into that category. You can make your own choice. And if you decide to act from, that's your discretion. There is a consensus that in criminal matters, everybody should be represented. And there's a public interest reason for that, which is very sound. In commercial matters, there is no such requirement, no such consensus. So you're making a choice. So just saying, well, it wasn't illegal. The public are saying, that's not enough. And when you come to the public interest, it's much more nuanced. It's a much greater question of judgment. So you can't sort of say, right, I've outsourced that judgment to the courts or a regulator, because the public is saying, no, we've given you the privileges. We need actually to be confident. You won't always get it right, and that's fine, but we need to have a measure of trust and confidence in you. And that's what's written into the principles.
Fascinating insights coming out of this report and speaking to you. What would you like to see as some practical next steps coming out of the recommendations you've made and the task force has made?
I'd love to see the profession sort of creating channels whereby it visibly and publicly discusses those issues with simply, as I said, the public, I would guess, would be relatively forgiving because they won't expect us all to be geniuses and to work, but they'll expect us to have some sort of worked through, thought out response to what is in the public interest and to have justifications rather more than just we didn't do anything illegal.
And practically, how would that work? Would you see that as sort of profession-wide pledges, sort of
I would see it as a greater profession-wide disclosure as to what they actually do and what processes they adopt. I think the issue about pledges, actually, Olivia mentioned earlier, I think, greenwashing. You sort of get into, that's probably not the right territory, I imagine. I think it's having better thought through answers which are publicly known on record and are recognized throughout the legal industry as a sensible consensus in relation to how you should act. But there's got to be greater transparency. There's got to be greater accessibility, by which we mean civil society. When you talk to them, say it's actually quite difficult to get into a law firm, to get anybody to come and talk to you. The profession needs to engage with civil society in this discussion and sort of take them along the path with it.
And I suppose one way that the public would be aware of any foul play would be through the regulator, perhaps publishing a report on their investigation. But I suppose the main way that the layman would really know about a firm that had perhaps participated in something like this would be the media. And I wonder if the implications, if it fails to have the intended impact or reach throughout the media to the public, what would that look like? And I suppose there is the element of PR and law firms having good PR potentially and making it go away. How would you sort of combat that?
Yes, this is, I don't like to say this to you, but this could be slightly unusual PR. This is behavior-based PR, but rather than aspirational PR. But you see, it's going to be, the press is going to be important in this because that is how the public reaches a determination. So in fact, you've got to engage with the press, and there's a tendency not to engage with the press at the moment. So there has to be a greater level of engagement there. That will then be the way in which the public will actually be able to make its own determination as to whether it thinks you still deserve its trust. So there's a big challenge. So going back, reverse my flippant comment about behavior-based PR. There is a need for firms actually to have people guide them through. Well, how do you deal? It's firstly civil society, and secondly the press. And civil society and the press work very closely together. So the press will say, well, let's go and ask firm ABC what they're doing. And then they'll say, let's go and ask Transparency International, is there ever any record of firm ABC having done this? Or do you know that they do it? And they'll sort of match the two up. I think from the profession's point of view, a major push for engagement with civil society, leading to a greater level of engagement with the press, a greater level of transparency, from which you would hope the press can then say, well, look, there are problems here, but in fact, there's a considerable degree of responsible behavior here, applied systematically to the best of firms' ability, and we recognize that. Or they may say, no, we see none of that. But in which case, you know that, and you know what your problem is. But that, I think, it's not a world of press releases. It's a world of engagement initially, I think, which is quite new for the profession.
Yeah, there is a point there as well, Guy, isn't there, though, that a number of law firms where they do get into problems is where they've overstated a position, whether it's on green, the environment, or their values, their credentials, and then they're caught short by acting and behaving in a very different way. So I think that's where public trust and confidence is eroded, and that's where the position of the wider profession becomes, the reputation of the wider profession also becomes damaged. And we're seeing that with slaps, aren't we? We've seen that with the use of NDAs. The report actually mentions this, So again, that's the sort of the want and the need to communicate, and law firms wanting to be seen to be doing the right thing and acting in the right way. Well, the counter to that is if you don't then abide by those stated principles, you not only damage your own reputation, but you damage the reputation of the wider profession. And we're seeing that.
That is true. And it goes back to this point that actually the duty is to maintain public trust in the profession as a whole. It's not discharging your duty to say, well, actually, the public trust my firm. These other people, they're all hopeless. That just doesn't do at all. But that issue, it will take the other thing to say, going back to your point about where firms fall from grace. Everybody will fall from grace from time to time. Of course, the press and the public will understand that. They won't expect it to be perfect. But if they haven't got any knowledge of what is the substance to what you normally do, aside from you sending out a press release saying we're brilliant, we do all of this. But if they've had a measuring, they will, I think, say, well, actually, we know they do this and this, and we know that they've got these systems in place to check it, and they drop the ball this time. That will be forgiven, but it won't be if they say, well, hang on a second, all this stuff we've been fed now looks to be completely questionable. So that's where really the sort of the hard work, which will come back to what I said. I'd love to see, particularly the big commercial firms, engaging more with civil society, then sitting with each other to determine, well, what are the principled answers to these difficult questions, and straying into some of those other ones about, well, would it be proper to actually look at these other issues of sort of AI, climate change, privacy, broader responsibility, and if so, how would you do that? And if the public see that being done in an orderly fashion, then I think they would be rather more forgiving when, as well, is bound to happen because they're very difficult issues, something goes wrong.
So just to summarise that point then about engagement with civil society, and that includes the media as a conduit to civil society, that really emphasises the point of the report: transparency, accessibility, and accountability. I mean, that's a nice summary of this conversation. Is that where the profession needs to be heading more, not just around these three areas that you've identified in this report as a starting point, but more broadly?
I think it is. And I think really what you're saying is, I think there needs to be a bit of a wake-up call. There's a contract with the public, not a literal one, but sort of metaphorically, there's a contract with the public under which they give you these privileges, which have really served you very well economically and will continue to serve you well. But you better get that contract out and read it again, because something had to be offered in return. And these are the things in relation to public trust which have to be offered in return. So I think that's a wake-up call, because you already hear, if you listen to parliamentarians, their answer to everything is, unsurprisingly, more legislation. You look over the last 30 years, you'd say, what wasn't the answer to many things? More legislation. But they've only really got one tool in the box. If you push them too far, that's what you will get. The outcome will not be what they want, but it'll be too late by then. So I think the profession, has to look, that is in the interest of the profession actually to avoid that. Forget the public interest. The profession's own interest is to don't bring that down on your head. I think this is the only way. So it does require, I think, a rather radically different approach, but it's achievable. But I think people will need to do it collaboratively and more in conjunction with other firms, because it's a very difficult thing to do on your own.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a brilliant way to sort of end the podcast, Guy. I mean, I don't know if you have anything else that you'd like to add that we perhaps maybe missed.
No, no, and I think it's fascinating because in many ways, what we're saying is we're back to the future. These things have always been there, but they've got rather overlooked. And you read those general principles; they're all very difficult issues: public interest, public trust and confidence in the profession, maintaining the system of justice and the rule of law. Crikey, yeah, but that is the deal, and I think we're now expected to be more on top of, if you like, delivering our end of the deal than possibly has been the case in the past.
I couldn't agree more. Especially as you say, when you look really into the future about, it could just result in more law, and even that's in the interests of law firms themselves. There really isn't much that's not in their interest to really abide by this transparency and accountability. And I think that your point on sort of more engagement with civil society is such a good point, and I think that will gain trust in itself.
I agree. But I would, yeah. So it'll be an exciting time. It'll be different, and people will. I think it'd be much better for the profession to actually address that as a group, because otherwise these things will be too difficult to achieve.
Do you have any sort of round tables coming up? Do you have anything else after this report coming up?
No, I mean we're finished in the sense that we've done the report. This is a bit rather odd thing with reports. So you do the report, and then the next day you think, well, yes, we've done the report. What happened? And then up to everybody else, who then sit there and sort of make comments about it and either say they did like it or they didn't like it. But I do know the Institute of Business Ethics is extremely keen to do with the legal profession what it's done with other sectors of business, where the comparable, that there'll be different requirements and duties in finance and manufacturing and pharmaceuticals, in agricultural products, but people are grappling with these issues all the time, and business ethics really is what guides you through, and so they're very happy to bring that expertise to the to create the table for the profession. But I think it then needs the profession to react to that, and to say, yeah, we want to take advantage of that.
Yes, absolutely. That engagement, as you say, is absolutely key. I mean, thank you so much for an insight into the knowledge that you have. Only half of, not even the insights that you have. It's been fantastic. I think we could go on for much longer. I have so many questions, but
don't worry, your audience will be deeply relieved.
Yeah, exactly.
He didn't. I think that's thank God that's the end of him.
No, absolutely not. You've been fantastic, Guy, and it's been a privilege and a pleasure. So thank you, and Gus as well. Thank you so much for your insights.
It's been a wonderful. Thank you, Guy, for taking time to do this. I'm sorry I wasn't at the launch. I would have loved to have been there, but I've read the report, and it's been a great conversation to have with you. And we will hopefully do a roundtable together on this at some point soon.
Yeah, no, I'd love to do that. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.